The message came on a Tuesday morning. It traveled across the cold emptiness of space for 3 days before it reached Earth. When it arrived, every screen on the planet flickered. Every radio crackled. Every phone buzzed with the same transmission. A face appeared. It was not human. The creature had 6 eyes arranged in a circle around its skull. Its skin was dark blue and covered in tiny scales. When it spoke, its voice was deep and cold, like rocks grinding together in a cave. Species of the third planet. You are now aware that you are not alone. The galactic hegemony has watched your world for 200 of your years. We have studied your broadcasts. We have learned your languages. We have decided your fate. The creature paused. Behind it, a massive window showed thousands of ships floating in the darkness of space. Each ship was bigger than a city. Each one carried weapons that could turn mountains into dust. You have 30 of your days to surrender your planet, your resources, and your population to the hegemony. If you refuse, we will destroy your cities, your oceans, and your air. We will make your world a tomb. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Respond with your surrender, or do not respond at all. The transmission ended. The screens went dark. For one long moment, the entire planet was silent. Then the panic began. In New York, people ran through the streets screaming. In Tokyo, traffic stopped as drivers abandoned their cars. In London, the Prime Minister called an emergency meeting that dissolved into shouting within minutes. In Moscow, generals argued about launching nuclear weapons at an enemy they could not even see. But in Houston, Texas, in a gray building with no windows, a man named Jake Murphy sat in a leather chair and watched the chaos on his monitors. He was 53 years old. His hair was gray and cut short. His face was lined with the marks of a man who had seen too much and worried too little. Jake was the commander of a project that did not officially exist. For 40 years, the United Nations had secretly prepared for this day. They called it Project Lighthouse. Its job was simple: get humanity ready for the moment when the stars came calling. Jake picked up his coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway. "Sir," a young woman rushed into the room. Her name was Katie Ortega, and she was Jake's assistant. She was 28, brilliant, and currently terrified. "Sir, the President is on line 1. The Secretary General is on line 2. The Joint Chiefs are on line 3. Everyone wants to know what we do." Jake nodded slowly. "What we do is simple, Lieutenant. We do what humans have always done when something bigger and meaner comes along." Katie stared at him. "What's that, sir?" Jake smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just heard a sheep declare war. "We remind them why every species in the universe learned to fear the dark." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the Texas plains. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, an alien fleet was waiting for humanity to kneel. Jake had other plans. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before someone answered. "Ben," Jake said. "It's time. Wake up, Lazarus." On the other end of the line, Commander Ben Harrison felt his heart stop for just a moment. He was stationed on the moon, in a base that was hidden beneath a crater on the dark side. He had been waiting for this call for 15 years. "Are you sure?" Ben asked. "They gave us 30 days, Jake replied. "Let's give them a surprise in 15. Ben hung up and turned to face his crew. There were 200 men and women in the base, all of them volunteers, all of them trained for exactly this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ben said, "we have work to do." 3 floors below the main base, hidden behind doors that were 10 feet thick, something ancient and powerful began to wake up. Machines hummed. Lights flickered on. Computer screens glowed with data that had been waiting decades to be used. Lazarus was not a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was a plan. Back on Earth, The world was falling apart. Governments collapsed. Markets crashed. Religious leaders declared the end times. Millions of people gave up hope. But not everyone. In small towns and big cities, in laboratories and military bases, in garages and basements, people started to work. Scientists pulled out old designs they had been forbidden to build. Engineers began constructing machines that had only existed in theory. Soldiers opened crates that had been sealed for decades. Humanity was not giving up. Humanity was getting angry. Jake watched the reports come in from around the world. In Germany, a team of physicists was testing a weapon that could punch holes in space itself. In Japan, a factory was producing drones by the thousands. In Brazil, miners were digging up metals that would be turned into armor. In Australia, a group of veterans was training young volunteers to fight. Katie appeared at his side again. "Sir, the president wants to know if we can win." Jake thought about the question. He thought about the 12,000 alien ships waiting in the darkness. He thought about their advanced technology, their superior numbers, their 1,000 years of conquest. Then he thought about humanity. He thought about the species that had survived ice ages and plagues, that had built pyramids with bare hands and walked on the moon with primitive rockets. He thought about the stubbornness, the rage, the absolute refusal to die. "Tell the president," Jake said. "That winning is not the question. The question is how badly we hurt them before this is over." He turned to face Katie, and his eyes were hard. "And the answer is very, very badly." Above the Earth, Admiral Zethral of the Hegemony Fleet watched the blue planet spin slowly in the void. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen moons. He had never lost a battle. But as he stared at Earth, something strange stirred in his chest. It was a feeling he had not experienced in centuries. It was doubt. He pushed it away. These were primitives. They had only just discovered space travel. They were divided, weak, and afraid. In 30 days, they would surrender. In 60 days, they would be slaves. In a year, they would be forgotten. That was the way of the galaxy. The strong conquered. The weak submitted. There were no exceptions. But as the Admiral watched the lights of human cities flicker below, he could not shake the feeling that this time, something was different. He was right. He just did not know how right he was. The Hegemony Fleet moved toward Earth like a slow wave of death. Admiral Zethral had sent 300 ships ahead of the main force. It was standard procedure. Send a small group first. Show the primitives your power. Let them see what was coming. The 300 ships passed Neptune. They passed Uranus. They passed Saturn with its beautiful rings. The sensors showed nothing. No defense stations, no weapons platforms, no signs that humanity was preparing to fight. Zethral felt satisfied. These creatures were exactly what he expected. They were hiding in their holes, praying to their gods, waiting for the end. His second in command, a tall creature with 4 arms and gray skin, stood beside him on the bridge. "Admiral, should we slow down? Run more scans?" Zethral made a sound that was like laughter. "What for? Look at them. They have no fleet. They have no defenses. They are insects waiting to be stepped on." The Vanguard fleet continued toward Jupiter. The gas giant hung in space like a giant eye, surrounded by its many moons. Europa, Io, Ganymede, Callisto, just frozen rocks in the darkness. Or so the Hegemony believed. Beneath the ice of Europa, Captain Megan Torres sat in the command chair of the starship Defiant. She was 34 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands were steady on the armrests, even though her heart was beating fast. The Defiant was not large. It was barely 500 meters long. Compared to the Hegemony ships, it was tiny. But size, Megan knew, was not everything. "All stations report ready," said her first officer. A man named Carlos Vega. He was calm, but his eyes showed the same fire that burned in every human on the ship. Megan nodded. Signal the fleet. We go on my mark. Across the moons of Jupiter, 49 other ships waited in silence. They had been built in secret over 2 decades. Their crews had trained in hidden bases on the far side of the moon. They had families who thought they were dead. They had sacrificed everything for this moment. The hegemony vanguard moved closer. 1 million kilometers. 500,000. 100,000. Megan watched her screen. The enemy ships were beautiful in a terrible way. Their hulls gleamed with metals that did not exist on Earth. Their engines glowed with power that humanity could not yet understand. But they had a weakness. Humanity had figured it out years ago when they captured their first alien probe. The hegemony shields were designed to stop energy weapons. Lasers, plasma bolts, particle beams. For 1,000 years, every species in the galaxy had fought with energy. Nobody used kinetic weapons anymore. They were considered primitive, outdated, useless. Nobody except humans. Megan opened the channel to all 50 ships. This is Captain Torres. Remember your training. Remember your families. Remember that you are the first line of defense for 8 billion people. Make every shot count. She paused, then smiled. Let's give them a proper human welcome. The ice of Europa cracked and shattered as the Defiant rose from its hiding place. Around Jupiter, the other ships did the same. From Io, from Ganymede, from Callisto, they emerged like ghosts from the darkness. The hegemony sensors screamed warnings. 300 commanders scrambled to understand what was happening. These readings made no sense. The humans had no fleet. The humans had nothing. But the readings were clear. 50 ships were moving toward them at impossible speed. Admiral Zethral received the report on his flagship. He stared at the data for a long moment, trying to process what he was seeing. 50 ships, he said slowly. They are challenging 300 with 50 ships. His second looked nervous. Admiral, perhaps we should? No. Zethral cut him off. Let them come. Let them see the difference between their primitive technology and our power. This will be a lesson. He was right. It was a lesson. Just not for humanity. The Defiance weapons officer, a young woman named Sofia Ruiz, had her finger on the firing button. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in simulators. But this was real. Those were real ships. Real enemies. Real war. Captain, Sofia said, I have targeting solutions on 12 vessels. Megan leaned forward. Fire. The Defiant shuddered as its main weapons activated. They were simple, really. Just electromagnetic rails that accelerated metal rods to a fraction of the speed of light. The rods were made of tungsten, one of the heaviest metals on Earth. They had no explosives. They did not need them. When you throw a rock fast enough, it becomes a bomb. The tungsten rods crossed the space between the fleets in less than a second. They hit the first hegemony ships before anyone could react. The shields flickered uselessly. The hulls crumbled like wet paper. 12 ships became 12 expanding clouds of debris. Across the human fleet, 49 other ships fired at the same time. The hegemony vanguard had never faced anything like this. Their computers could not even identify the weapons being used. They tried to raise shields. They tried to return fire. They tried to retreat. They failed. Sofia was already reloading. The Defiance systems hummed as new rods slid into the firing chambers. Second volley ready. Fire, Megan said again. More ships died. The darkness of space filled with fire and wreckage. Escape pods launched in all directions, tiny lights fleeing from the destruction. On his flagship, Admiral Zethral watched the impossible happen. In 7 minutes, 92 of his ships were gone. Not damaged, not disabled. Gone. turned to dust by weapons his sensors could barely detect. "What are they using?" he demanded. His science officer was shaking. Literally shaking. "Metal, Admiral. They are throwing metal at us. Dense metal, moving at speeds we cannot defend against." Zethral could not speak. For the first time in his 200 years of life, he had no words. The humans were not fighting with energy. They were fighting with rocks. Fast rocks. And his shields, his beautiful advanced shields, were useless against them. The vanguard began to retreat. Ships that had crossed galaxies, that had burned worlds to ash, were running from 50 small vessels crewed by creatures who had only left their own planet a century ago. Megan watched them go. Around her, the bridge crew was silent. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality. They had just killed thousands of beings. They had started a war that would decide the fate of their species. Carlos spoke first. "Captain, they are retreating." Megan nodded slowly. "Signal the fleet. Do not pursue. Let them run. Let them tell their admiral what happened here." She stood up and walked to the main window. Outside, the wreckage of hegemony ships drifted through space. Some pieces were still burning. "They thought we would surrender," she said quietly. "They thought we would kneel." She turned to face her crew. These men and women who had given up everything to be here. These humans who had just proven that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. "Send a message to Earth. Tell them the first battle is over. Tell them we won." She paused, and a small smile crossed her face. "Tell them that humanity says hello." On his flagship, Admiral Zethral received the message. It was short. Just 2 words in a human language called English. "We're coming." For the first time in centuries, the Admiral felt fear. 6 months after the Battle of Jupiter, the hegemony changed their strategy. They stopped underestimating humans. They stopped sending small fleets. Instead, they sent everything. 8,000 warships surrounded Mars. Mars was humanity's second home. 2 million people lived there, in domed cities and underground tunnels. They had built farms that grew food in red sand. They had factories that made machines from Martian metal. They had children who had never seen Earth, who called the rust-colored plains their home. Now, those children looked up at a sky filled with enemy ships. Governor Sam Caldwell stood in the command center of New Phoenix, the largest city on Mars. He was 60 years old. His face was weathered from years of hard work, and his hands still had the calluses of the mechanic he used to be. He had come to Mars 20 years ago with nothing but a toolkit and a dream. Now he was responsible for 2 million lives. Colonel Danny Price stood beside him, pointing at a holographic map. Danny was the military commander of Mars. He was young, only 35, but he had the eyes of a much older man. "War did that to people. They have us completely surrounded," Danny said. "Our orbital platforms can hold them for maybe 3 days. After that, they break through and start bombing the cities." Sam nodded slowly. "And evacuation? We have tunnels that lead to the old mining sites in the south. We can hide some people there, but there is nowhere to go after that. No ships. No rescue coming." Sam looked at the faces around him. Engineers who had built this city with their bare hands. Teachers who had raised a generation of Martian children. Doctors, farmers, miners, workers. Regular people who had never asked for a war. "What about Earth?" someone asked. "Can they send help?" Danny shook his head. "Earth is fighting its own battles. The main hegemony fleet is attacking the moon. They can barely hold their own position." The room fell silent. 8,000 ships. 2 million people. No escape. Sam walked to the window. Outside, the red desert stretched to the horizon. Somewhere beyond that horizon, his wife was buried. She had died 5 years ago, a simple accident in one of the greenhouses. He had thought about leaving Mars after that, going back to Earth, starting over. But he had stayed, because Mars was home now, and you do not abandon your home. He turned back to face the room. "We are not evacuating," he said. Danny blinked. "Sir? We are not running. We are not hiding." Sam's voice was hard. "This is our planet. These are our cities. And if they want them, they will have to come down here and take them." A woman in the back spoke up. Her name was Linda Ortiz, and she ran the main hospital. "Sam, we have families here, children. We cannot ask them to fight." "I am not asking anyone to fight," Sam replied. "I am asking you to survive. We move the civilians to the deep tunnels. We put everyone who can hold a weapon on the surface, and we make them pay for every inch of red dirt they try to take." Danny studied the map for a long moment. Then a small smile crossed his face. The hegemony has never fought a ground war on a planet like this. The dust storms will blind their sensors. The cold will freeze their equipment. The tunnels will confuse their troops. "Exactly," Sam said. "They think they have the advantage because they control space. But space does not matter if they cannot hold the ground." He looked around the room one more time. "We are Martians. We did not survive dust storms and radiation and loneliness just to give up when things get hard. So let them come. Let them see what we are made of." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, one by one, people stood up. Engineers who would become soldiers. Teachers who would become scouts. Doctors who would save lives under enemy fire. They had no fleet. They had no advanced weapons. They had no hope of rescue. But they had something the hegemony did not understand. They had nothing left to lose. The siege lasted 12 days. 12 days of fire and blood and dust. 12 days that would become legend. The hegemony landed troops in waves. Thousands of soldiers in armored suits, carrying weapons that could cut through steel. They marched toward the domed cities with confidence. They had conquered 100 worlds. They knew how this worked. But Mars was not like other worlds. The first wave walked into a dust storm. The red sand clawed their sensors and scratched their visors. By the time they realized they were surrounded, it was too late. Sergeant Lisa Cho led a team of 12 fighters through the chaos. They were not soldiers. 2 months ago, Lisa had been a mining supervisor. Now she was a killer. She pressed herself against a rock formation, watching the enemy patrol through the swirling dust. Her team had no armor, just thick jackets meant for cold weather. They had no energy rifles, just chemical-powered guns that the hegemony considered ancient. But those ancient guns worked just fine. "Wait for it," Lisa whispered. Her breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Let them get closer. The patrol moved past their position. 8 hegemony soldiers, tall and confident, scanning for threats their sensors could not detect. Lisa gave the signal. 12 guns fired at once. The hegemony soldiers fell before they could even raise their weapons. Their advanced armor had small gaps at the joints, and humans were very good at finding weaknesses. "Move," Lisa ordered. "We have 3 minutes before their backup arrives." Her team grabbed the enemy weapons and disappeared into the tunnels. They would use those weapons in the next ambush. And the ambush after that. This was how humans fought. Not with honor. Not with rules. They fought to survive. The hegemony learned this the hard way. In the command center, Sam watched reports come in from across the planet. Ambushes in the canyons of Valles Marineris. Sabotage at the enemy landing zones. Traps in tunnels that had been mined for decades. Every victory was small. A patrol destroyed here. A supply depot burned there. But the small victories added up. Danny appeared at his side. "Sir, their advance has stopped. They are pulling back to regroup." Sam allowed himself a tiny moment of hope. "How long can we keep this up?" "I do not know. We are running low on ammunition. We have lost 400 fighters." The civilians in the deep tunnels are running out of food. But we are still standing. Danny nodded. Yes, sir. We are still standing. On the Hegemony command ship, the generals could not understand what was happening. They had superior numbers, superior technology, superior everything. And yet, they were losing. Not losing the battle. They would win eventually. That was certain. But they were losing soldiers. They were losing equipment. They were losing time. And every day that passed, the humans of Mars became harder to kill. One general, a creature with silver scales and 3 eyes, studied the reports with growing frustration. They do not surrender, he said. They do not negotiate. They do not even seem to understand that they cannot win. Another general replied, Perhaps they are insane. No. The first general shook his head. I have watched their behavior. They know they are going to die. They simply do not care. They fight because fighting is all they have left. He turned to look out the window at the red planet below. I am starting to understand why the Admiral was afraid. On Mars, Lisa Cho sat in a dark tunnel, cleaning her rifle. Her team was resting around her, sleeping in shifts. They had been fighting for 8 days. They were tired, hungry, and scared. But they were not defeated. Lisa looked at the faces of her fighters. A young man who used to be a chef. A woman who used to teach math. An old mechanic who could barely hold his weapon. Regular people who had become warriors. Hey, Sarge, the chef said. His name was Tony. He was barely 20 years old. Do you think Earth knows what we are doing here? Lisa nodded. They know. The whole galaxy knows. Good. Tony smiled weakly. I want them to remember us. Even if we do not make it. Lisa reached over and squeezed his shoulder. We are going to make it, she said. And we are going to make them remember us for a very long time. Outside, the dust storm continued to rage. Inside the tunnels, humanity continued to fight. And somewhere in the darkness of space, reinforcements were finally coming. Mars would not fall. Not today. Not ever. The Hegemony controlled the space around Earth. Their ships blocked the sun for hours each day, casting shadows across entire continents. They bombed cities that refused to surrender. They landed troops on every continent, hunting for resistance fighters. But they could not finish the job. Humanity had gone underground, literally. Cities emptied as people fled to bunkers, caves, and tunnels. The subways of New York became shelters. The mines of South Africa became fortresses. The catacombs of Paris became hospitals. They called it the Long Night. Dr. Amy Vasquez had not seen the sun in 18 months. She worked in a laboratory hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that had been built during the Cold War and then forgotten. Now it housed the most important secret on Earth. Amy was 42 years old. Before the war, she had been a physics professor at a small university. She had published papers that nobody read. She had taught classes to students who barely paid attention. She had lived a quiet, ordinary life. Now she was trying to save the human race. The laboratory was crowded with equipment that had been salvaged from destroyed research centers around the world. Computers hummed in the darkness. Screens glowed with equations and diagrams. 30 scientists worked in shifts, sleeping on cots in the corner, eating whatever food could be smuggled through enemy lines. Their goal was simple: figure out how the Hegemony jump drive worked. If humans could travel faster than light, they could strike behind enemy lines. They could disappear before the Hegemony could react. They could turn the war around. The problem was that the jump drive was incredibly complicated. It used physics that humans barely understood. It required materials that did not exist on Earth. It was a technology 1,000 years ahead of anything humans had ever built. But Amy was stubborn. She had been stubborn her whole life. Her father used to joke, and she would argue with the wall until the wall gave up. Right now, she was arguing with the laws of physics. General Chris Donovan arrived in the middle of the night. He was the military commander of the resistance, a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had lost 3 children in the first year of the war. He had nothing left except the fight. "Doctor," he said, "I need good news." Amy looked up from her work. Her hair was a mess. Her clothes were dirty. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. "We are close," she said. "Maybe 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Chris sat down heavily in a chair. "We might not have 3 weeks. The hegemony is pushing hard in Europe. They broke through the Swiss defensive line yesterday. If they reach the mountain bunkers..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Amy nodded slowly. "I understand. We will work faster. Can you?" She thought about the question. She thought about her team, exhausted and scared. She thought about the calculations that refused to make sense. She thought about the billions of people hiding in the dark, waiting for hope. "Yes," she said. "We can." Chris studied her face for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "Do you know why I believe you, Doctor?" Amy shook her head. "Because in 3 years of war, I have learned one thing. Humans do not know how to give up. We do not know when we are beaten. We keep fighting long after any reasonable species would surrender." He stood up and straightened his uniform. "I have watched farmers pick up rifles. I have watched children carry ammunition through war zones. I have watched old men charge into battle with nothing but knives." He walked toward the door, then paused. "If anyone can break the laws of physics, Doctor, it is humans. Because we do not believe in laws we do not like." After he left, Amy turned back to her work. Around her, the other scientists were watching. "You heard the general," she said. "We have 2 weeks. Let us get to work." Across the world, humanity was adapting. In the ruins of Chicago, a group of teenagers had built a radio station from salvaged parts. Every night, they broadcast messages of hope to anyone who could listen. They played music. They told jokes. They reminded people that they were not alone. In the jungles of Brazil, a former army captain named Pedro Santos had trained guerrilla fighters. He taught them to move through the forest like ghosts. He taught them to strike fast and disappear faster. He taught them that fear was a weapon, and humans knew how to use it. In a small village in Japan, an old woman named Keiko Tanaka organized a network of spies. She used her wrinkled face and humble manner to move through hegemony checkpoints without suspicion. She carried messages hidden in the lining of her coat. She had personally delivered intelligence that saved thousands of lives. Humanity was not winning, but humanity was surviving. And sometimes, surviving was the same thing as winning. On the hegemony command ship, Admiral Zethral stared at the latest reports with growing frustration. 3 years. 3 years of occupation, and the humans still refused to submit. His second-in-command approached carefully. "Admiral, we have destroyed their cities. We control their skies. We have killed millions of their soldiers. Why do they continue to fight?" Zethral was silent for a long moment. "I have studied their history," he finally said. "Do you know what I found?" "No, Admiral. I found a species that has spent its entire existence at war. They fight each other. They fight nature. They fight disease. They fight anything and everything that threatens them." He turned to face his second. "They do not fight because they think they can win. They fight because fighting is what they are. That is, disturbing." "Yes." Zethral returned his gaze to the window, to the blue planet below. "It is, because I am starting to believe that the only way to stop them is to kill every single one. And we do not have enough soldiers for that." In the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Amy Vasquez made a breakthrough. It happened at 3 in the morning, while everyone else was sleeping. She was reviewing the equations for the 100th time when suddenly everything clicked. The hegemony jump drive did not just bend space. It created a pocket of altered physics, a bubble where the rules were different. And if you could create that bubble, you could move faster than light. The key was not power. The key was precision. Amy ran to the central computer and began typing furiously. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Diagrams formed and reformed. She worked for 6 hours without stopping, checking and rechecking her calculations. When she was done, she sat back and laughed. It was a strange sound in the dark, quiet laboratory. It was the sound of hope. One of her colleagues, a young man named David Park, woke up from his nap. "Dr. Vasquez, are you okay?" Amy looked at him with wild eyes. "Get General Donovan on the line. Tell him we figured it out." David stared at her. "Figured what out?" Amy smiled. It was a real smile, the first one in 18 months. How to win this war. Beneath the earth, in bunkers and tunnels and caves, humanity waited. They did not know that everything was about to change. They did not know that hope was coming. They only knew that they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, they would keep fighting. That was the human way. Above, the hegemony fleet continued its patrol, confident in their inevitable victory. They had no idea what was coming. In secret shipyards hidden beneath the ice of Antarctica, humanity built a new fleet. It was not large. Only 50 ships, small and fast, designed by engineers who had nothing left to lose. But these ships were different. They could jump. Admiral Mick Brennan stood on the bridge of the starship, Perseverance, and watched his crew prepare for the most important mission in human history. He was 60 years old, a veteran of wars on 3 continents, a survivor of the first hegemony attack on Earth's moon. He had lost his wife in that attack, his son, his entire life. Now he was going to make someone pay. Lieutenant Pete Garcia, his tactical officer, looked up from his console. "Sir, all ships report ready. Jump drives are charged and stable." Nick nodded slowly. "What is our target?" "Nexus Prime, sir. The capital of the hegemony. The seat of the Council of 7 Species. And how many enemy ships are defending it?" Pete swallowed. "Approximately 5,000, sir. We will be outnumbered 100 to 1. Nick turned to face his crew. There were 200 men and women on this ship, volunteers, every one of them. They knew the odds. They knew they might not come back. They had volunteered anyway. "I want to tell you something," Nick said. His voice was calm, steady. 4 years ago, the hegemony came to our solar system. They declared war on us. They said we would surrender or die. He paused, letting the silence stretch. They were wrong. Around the bridge, crew members straightened in their chairs. Eyes that had been tired became sharp. Hands that had been shaking became steady. We did not surrender. We did not die. We fought with everything we had. And when that was not enough, we found more. We lost cities. We lost loved ones. We lost years hiding in darkness like animals. Nick's voice grew harder. But we never stopped. We never quit. And today we show them what happens when you push humanity too far." He turned back to the main window, where stars waited in the blackness of space. "Set course for Nexus Prime. Maximum speed." Pete hesitated for just a moment. "Sir, are you sure?" "If we fail..." Nick smiled. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to fear. "Then we fail. But we will fail so loudly that the entire galaxy hears us. We will fail so spectacularly that 1,000 years from now, species we have never met will tell stories about the day 50 human ships attacked the heart of an empire." He sat down in his command chair. "Activate the jump drive. Let us go introduce ourselves." The 50 ships vanished from Earth's orbit. One moment they were there. The next, they were gone, leaving nothing but a ripple in space. The hegemony did not detect them coming. Nexus Prime was the most beautiful world in the galaxy. Its cities were made of crystal and light. Its oceans were deep blue and filled with life. Its people had never known war, Not in 10,000 years. They knew it now. The human fleet appeared in orbit without warning. 50 ships, small and fast, surrounded by a defensive force that outnumbered them 100 to 1. It should have been a joke. It should have been a suicide mission. It was not. Nick had studied the Battle of Jupiter carefully. He knew how the hegemony fought. He knew their weaknesses. And he knew exactly how to exploit them. All ships, he said calmly, target their command vessels first. Do not stop moving. Do not give them a chance to coordinate. The human fleet scattered, each ship picking a different target, flying erratic patterns that the hegemony computers could not predict. The railguns fired, tungsten rods screaming across space at relativistic speeds. The first wave of hegemony ships died before they could even return fire. On the surface of Nexus Prime, the Council of 7 Species watched in horror. They had never seen their fleet defeated. They had never imagined it was possible. Ambassador Crixel, a diplomatic advisor who had argued against the war from the beginning, stood at the window of the council chamber. "They are not fighting like soldiers," he said quietly. "They are fighting like survivors." "That is impossible," one of the council members replied. "We destroyed their world. We occupy their planet. They have nothing left." Crixel shook his head. "That is why they are so dangerous. They have nothing left to lose." In orbit, the battle raged for 6 hours. The hegemony had numbers, but humans had rage. They fought with a fury that the galaxy had never seen. Ships that should have retreated kept firing. Pilots who were wounded kept flying. Crews that ran out of ammunition rammed their ships into enemy vessels. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. When the last hegemony warship surrendered, Nick opened a channel to the council chamber on the surface. "This is Admiral Brennan of Earth," he said. His voice was tired but steady. "4 years ago, you declared war on us. You said we would surrender or face annihilation." He paused, and in that pause, 100 species across 1,000 worlds held their breath. "We are here to accept your surrender." The council chamber was silent. Nick could see them on his screen. These leaders of a galactic empire. These rulers of 1,000 worlds. They looked small, afraid. Ambassador Crixel stepped forward. His voice trembled as he spoke. "How is this possible? You were primitives. You had nothing. How could you defeat us?" Nick chuckled. It was a soft sound, almost gentle. But in that chuckle was 4 years of hiding, for years of fighting, 4 years of watching friends die and cities burn. "You made a mistake," Nick said. "You thought having nothing meant we were weak. But that is the thing about humans. When we have nothing to lose, we become something you can never defeat." He leaned forward, and his eyes were hard as stone. "We become the monsters your ancestors warned you about." The Treaty of Nexus was signed 3 days later. Humanity was given full standing in the galactic community. Their borders were recognized. Their sovereignty was guaranteed. Every prisoner was returned. Every occupied territory was freed. But more than that, humans were given something no other species had ever earned: fear. The hegemony withdrew from Earth. They rebuilt their fleet, but they never forgot. For generations, their children would be taught about the war with humanity, about the species that did not know how to surrender, about the monsters from the third planet. On Earth, the sun rose on a free world. People emerged from their bunkers and tunnels, blinking in light they had not seen in years. They looked up at a sky that was finally empty of enemy ships. Colonel Jake Murphy, the man who had started all of this, stood on a hill in Texas and watched the dawn. He was 57 years old now. His hair was completely gray. His face was lined with scars. But he was smiling. Kitty Ortega, his assistant, stood beside him. She was not young anymore either. The war had aged them all. "Sir," she said, "we did it." Jake nodded slowly. "We did. Though I still cannot quite believe it. What happens now?" Jake thought about the question. He thought about the billions of people who had died. He thought about the cities that had burned. He thought about everything humanity had sacrificed. Now, he said, we rebuild. And we make sure this never happens again. Katie looked at him. How do we do that? Jake smiled, the same Wolf smile he had worn 4 years ago when this all started. By becoming the thing that guards the galaxy. By making sure that when the next threat comes, humanity is standing at the front, ready to fight. He turned to face her. They declared war on us because they thought we were weak. They will never make that mistake again. And neither will anyone else. Far away, in the crystal halls of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Crixel was teaching a class of young diplomats. They were the future leaders of the hegemony, the ones who would rebuild what the war had destroyed. Let me tell you a story, Crixel said. A story about a species from a small blue planet. A species that should not have survived. A species that defied every rule of the galaxy. The young diplomats listened carefully. When we found them, we thought they were nothing. Primitives. Insects. We gave them a choice. Surrender or die. Crixel paused, and his eyes grew distant. And they only chuckled. One of the students raised a hand. What happened then, Ambassador? Crixel looked at her for a long moment. Then they taught us what it means to be human. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a small blue planet, humanity was rebuilding, growing, getting stronger. Remember this lesson, Crixel said. Never again will we underestimate them. Never again will we threaten them. And never, ever again will we give them a reason to fight. He turned back to face his students. Because humans do not fight to win. They fight to survive. And when you push them to the edge, when you take everything they have, they become something that cannot be stopped. He paused. They become the thing that the darkness fears. And across the galaxy, in 100 languages on 1,000 worlds, stories began to spread. Stories of a species that would not kneel. Stories of soldiers who smiled while dying. Stories of farmers and teachers and children who stood against an empire. Stories of the day the galaxy declared war on humanity. And humanity only chuckled. The end.